They called her broken, a hybrid mistake, but one man saw her, and he chose to stay. This is not a story about war, it is about a choice. A man with no power dared to stand against the system simply because he believed that love could grow from ruin. And a child they tried to erase might just be our last hope. Stay until the end, because some families are not born. They are chosen. The transit tram gave a final mechanical groan before grinding to a halt. Outside the window, the world was gray and still, and so cold the frost clung to the metal frame like it was trying to swallow it whole. Kael Thorne stepped out alone, boots crunching into the brittle crust of ice that coated the docking slab. The air bit at his exposed neck immediately, sharp enough to draw tears if he let it. He didn't. No one waited to greet him. No other passengers. Just the soft buzz of overhead lights barely holding power, and a distorted announcement repeating in a language no one had spoken in decades. Welcome to the Les Prime. He adjusted the strap of the heavy maintenance case over his shoulder. His jacket was thermal-lined but old, patched where heat sealing had failed. Beneath it, layered armor plating peeked through civilian issue, but clearly modified. It wasn't for show. Places like the Les didn't care if you came to help. They just made sure you didn't leave. The facility sat like a broken tooth in a snowy jaw, a squat concrete structure half buried in drift and time. Hazard symbols peeled off the front wall. Scorch marks darkened the entry slab. It didn't look like a hospital, not anymore. Kael had seen abandoned factories that looked friendlier. Inside, the warmth hit like synthetic breath, dry, recycled, with an undercurrent of rusted coolant and chemical sterilizer. The kind of place that tried to smell clean but failed. He walked up to the reception glass where a woman sat hunched behind a cracked data panel. She didn't look up until the panel beeped. Systems diagnostics, she asked flatly. Unit 9, Kael said. Secondary sensors, internal cams, and power sync check. Thorne, Kael. Level B3. The woman pressed a button. A buzzer groaned and a side door clicked open. She didn't say another word. Kael passed through. The corridor beyond was narrow and pulsing with low-frequency hums, like the walls themselves were trying to remember how to breathe. Ceiling lights flickered. Wires hung like veins from access panels that hadn't seen a technician in months. Maybe years. He moved through the silence with the ease of someone used to being ignored. The elevator didn't work. Of course. He took the manual lift down 2 levels, each clunk of the shaft echoing like footsteps from something that had once lived here but didn't anymore. Level B3. The paint was older here, stenciled letters half worn, isolation hold, authorized staff only. It was colder too. Not by degrees. By presence. The air wasn't heavy. It was watching. A bored security officer leaned against the bulkhead next to the final door. His weapon was charged but unshouldered. He barely looked up. That time again, he asked. Diagnostics, Kael replied. The guard nodded. She's in there. Don't lean on the glass. She bites. Kael didn't smile. The surveillance room was dimly lit and lined with outdated terminals looping through corrupted security feeds. One wall, however, was dominated by a single reinforced window, thick, soundproof, and smudged by something oily. She was on the other side. Strapped to a padded restraint bench, limbs bound, eyes half-lidded but aware. Her skin shimmered faintly in the low light, violet blue and bruised in too many places. Ilari, by the facial structure. Long, crimson hair clung in matted strands to her shoulders. The gown she wore was translucent, medical in theory, but clearly inadequate. It clung to her like shrink-wrapped shame. There was no nameplate. No chart. No vitals on the screen. Kael turned to the nearest terminal and pulled up the diagnostics for Unit 9. Half the cameras were out. The other half were on loop, some playing footage that had clearly been doctored. One hallway showed the same 4-second clip of empty silence, over and over. But one frame glitched. Someone dragging something. Small. Light. Time code missing. Kael froze the frame and copied it to his slate. As soon as he saved it, the terminal restarted itself without warning. When it came back up, the file was gone. He said nothing. Just kept working. But her eyes were on him. Even through layers of glass, even drugged and restrained, she was watching. Later, when the guard stepped out for a break, Kael walked closer to the window. His reflection blurred against hers. She didn't move. But then, barely audible, her lips parted. "They took my daughter." Kael blinked. Her voice was like static. Worn down but deliberate. "She's alive. They drugged me. Put her on a ship. I saw the shuttle lights through the snow." Kael swallowed. "How do you know she's still alive?" Her gaze didn't waver. "She dreams loud. I hear her when I sleep." He stood still for a long moment, unsure whether to speak again. But her words didn't leave him. Not when he left. Not when he reviewed the system backups that night in the empty mess hall. The copied file? Wiped. The logs? Retroactively deleted. But he found something else. A transport log marked specimen, untagged, juvenile, no destination, outbound the same night she arrived. That wasn't madness. That was a cover-up. The next morning, Kael did what no one else had done since she arrived. He brought her warmth. A salvaged mechanic's thermal wrap. Folded. Tucked under his jacket. He entered through the maintenance door while the guard was out again. She flinched when the restraints loosened but didn't resist. She wrapped the blanket tight around her shoulders. Her fingers trembled. "I don't want to die in here," she said. "You won't," Kael said softly. "You're just a tech." "I came to fix cameras," he replied. "Maybe I found something else broken." She looked up. Her name wasn't written anywhere, but it was spoken in her silence. Her presence. She didn't beg. She didn't threaten. She trusted. Kael didn't go home that night. He stayed in the diagnostics bay, staring at the reinforced door down the corridor. When he finally moved, it wasn't out of fear. Or hope. It was because she had said something no system could erase. She dreams loud. And Kael knew what it meant to live in silence. Kael Thorne didn't sleep. Not properly. He sat hunched in a corner of the diagnostics bay, the cold air chewing its way through the seams of his jacket while old data nodes blinked behind him like distant stars in a dead sky. His slate buzzed once access error and then went quiet again. He'd tried everything. Manual retrieval. Scrub cache access. Backdoor kernel commands. But the transport log he'd found last night, the one labeled juvenile specimen, unregistered, was already gone. Wiped. Replaced with a clean manifest that listed nothing unusual. They hadn't just hidden it. They'd expected someone might look. Kael stared at the blank slate for a long time. Then closed it. Somewhere down the corridor, behind 3 reinforced doors and a silent guard station, a woman lay on a padded bench, unshackled now, but still confined. Lyenne Vera. He hadn't spoken her name aloud. It hadn't even been in the files. But she had one. And a story. And a daughter. And none of it matched the paperwork. He checked the system again before heading out. The audio from the isolation chamber? No logs. No microphone activated. That meant her voice from yesterday, "They took my daughter," hadn't been recorded. Only he had heard it. Only he could confirm it had happened. And somehow, that made it feel more real. He walked the hallway again, steps slower this time. The security guard didn't bother looking up. "She's still breathing?" the man asked flatly. Kael didn't answer. Inside the surveillance room, Lyenne sat upright now, arms wrapped around herself. The blanket he had given her was pulled tight across her shoulders, hiding most of her form except for her eyes. They watched him. Not with fear. Not even with hope. With certainty. Kael turned to the console again. This time, he bypassed the diagnostics pretext and dove directly into the internal cam archives, accessing the data streams that weren't meant to be reviewed by low-clearance staff. The deeper he went, the more inconsistencies appeared. Feed loops altered time codes. Missing frames. One sequence, marked the night Lyenne was admitted, had a file header labeled, Bio Class Redirect. The name meant nothing at first. But the deeper he traced the metadata, the more it aligned with a specific transport, outbound, cold-rated shuttle, no registry. He found a passenger record. One entry. Not a person. Not even a name. Just, Bio JVNL. Class B custody, private contract. His chest tightened. He pulled the footage again. Same hallway. Same loop. But now, with the brightness levels adjusted, he could make out a small figure-like body mass, being dragged by a gloved hand. Kael saved the frame. Disconnected his slate from the network. And walked out. When he entered the observation room again, she was standing. Not fully. Her legs trembled beneath her, and she leaned against the padded wall like it was the only thing keeping her upright. But she faced him now. Fully awake. Fully present. I saw you trace it, she said softly. Kael didn't ask how she knew. The cameras didn't work. There was no mic. No audio feed. But she had known. Somehow. You're not just trying to fix things, she continued. You're looking for her too now? Kael hesitated. You said she was alive, he replied. I believe you. She blinked once. The first visible break in her expression. Her jaw trembled. Just slightly. No one else did, she said. Kael glanced at the door. The guard was still absent. He stepped forward, until only the thickness of the glass separated them again. I found a manifest, he said. Unregistered juvenile, transported off-site the same night you were admitted. Her breath caught. There's no ID, he added. No skin tag. Nothing to trace. But it was real. She's 5, Lyenne said, voice barely audible. Ilari H cycles, not human. Her name is Niva. She has my hair. My skin. But her eyes, she stopped. They're his. Kael said nothing. Let her finish. They said I was unstable. That I imagined her. That my mind cracked during birthing. I started to believe them. But you didn't, he said quietly. No, she whispered. Because she dreams loud. That night, Kael sat in the equipment storage room, staring at the blank slate screen in his hands. Not recording. Just, holding it. He remembered the look in Lyenne's eyes. It wasn't the look of a patient. It was the look of someone who'd been told too many times they were wrong, until silence seemed safer than truth. And she had stayed silent until someone finally listened. Kael closed the slate. Stood up. Walked to the supply closet. He pulled out a set of insulated wraps. Old, but serviceable. A heat pack. Nutrient bar. Water capsule. He tucked them all into the folds of his technician jacket, which now felt less like a uniform and more like a disguise. He returned to level B3. Same guard. Same bored expression. Diagnostics again, the man asked. Kael nodded. He passed through without another word. Lyenne was awake. Sitting on the floor now. Her hands folded in her lap. The blanket around her shoulders like a shield. I don't know how to ask for help, she said when he entered. Kael crouched just inside the room. You don't have to. He handed her the gear one item at a time. She took them carefully, reverently, like she hadn't touched anything real in weeks. I'm not going to let you die in here, Kael said. She looked up sharply. Why? Kael paused. Then answered with more honesty than he expected from himself. Because I've watched people die before. Because I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. Because the system says you're broken, and I don't see broken. I see a mother. Her hands trembled around the wrap. No one's called me that, she said. Not since they took her. You still are. She nodded slowly. A small, fragile thing. Then tightened the thermal around herself. Kael rose and turned toward the door. I have to make preparations, he said. When I come back tomorrow, we move. Lyenne looked up, eyes sharp again. You really believe she's out there? I do. Even if they call me mad. Kael's voice was quiet but steady. Mad is what they call you when you remember something they want forgotten. And then he was gone, footsteps fading down the corridor. She sat alone again. But this time, the silence didn't feel so heavy. Kael didn't sleep again. By now, he wasn't sure he remembered how. Sleep was for people who trusted the world to hold steady while their eyes were closed. Kael Thorne had seen too much, left too many names unspoken in reports no one read, to believe in that kind of safety. He was crouched in the auxiliary node chamber, back pressed to the coolant wall, the hum of decaying servers singing a low dirge behind him. A cracked maintenance console glowed weakly in front of him, its ports jury-rigged to an unlisted uplink he'd embedded during his first shift here, just in case. This was just in case. His fingers moved quickly across the interface, not hesitating, not backspacing. The fewer errors, the less chance of flagging. He wasn't in the official system anymore. He'd bypassed that 6 hours ago. This was the underlayer. The blood vessels of the less prime's forgotten architecture where junk data, suppressed logs, and purged manifests drifted like digital ghosts. And there it was. Outbound transfer code, TLP Delta 97. Timestamp, 3:16, same hour Lyenne arrived. Manifest, biological specimen, Class B minor. Origin, unregistered ward. Destination, redacted. Custody, private custodial contract, Biogene Tier 4 clearance. Kael stared at the screen. There was no name. No age. No kin marker. Just a child-shaped hole in the record. But the timestamp was undeniable. They'd taken Niva, labeled her as a specimen, and shipped her into a system that didn't just erase people, it processed them. Kael copied the entire string to a sterile slate and immediately disconnected it from the node. No uplink. No signal. No trace. He leaned back, rubbed his hands over his face. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a technician. He felt like a witness. He waited until the hallway cams on level B3 ran their nightly diagnostic loop, a 60-second window where all internal feeds rebooted in sequence. He'd engineered it himself 2 days ago, buried in a false update packet that no one bothered to verify. When the lights flickered, Kael moved. He reached the isolation wing through the maintenance crawl space, climbed out near the emergency vent duct, and accessed the secondary door using the passcode he'd lifted off the guard's wristband reflection 3 nights earlier. Lyenne was already awake. She didn't ask how he got in. She just stood slowly, blanket wrapped around her like armor, and said, "You found her, didn't you?" Kael nodded. "I found the record. They called her cargo." She didn't cry. Not this time. Her face was stone. "Where is she now?" she asked. "I don't know. But I have a location ping buried in the outbound trail. Last bounce was a transport corridor linked to the old biogene reclamation sites in Sector 9. Lyenne's eyes narrowed. "They are selling her?" "They are holding her," Kael said. "But yes. That's the endgame." "And what's the plan?" He didn't hesitate. "We leave tomorrow night. I'll trigger a facility power fault. Just enough to scramble comms and disable secondary locks. You'll walk out through the east freight path during shift change. I'll meet you there with supplies." Lyenne stared at him, and for the first time, Kael couldn't read her expression. "You've done this before," she said. Kael nodded once. "Something like it." "Not for someone like me?" "That doesn't matter." "It does to me." Kael looked down at the floor. "There were engineers once," he said quietly. 3 of them. Trapped during a cryo-core reset on Devon Station. The override seals failed. They were alive for 9 minutes while coolant flooded the room. She said nothing. "I sent the report," Kael added. "Detailed. Precise. Documented every second. The company buried it. Said it was human error. Wrote me off. Blacklisted me." He looked up. "Ever since then, I stopped trusting silence." Lyenne didn't reach for him. Didn't speak. But something shifted in her posture. Less guarded. More grounded. "Then let's break it," she said. Together. The next day was a blur of quiet motion. Kael scavenged supplies, thermal rations, medical wraps, a skin seal kit in case Lyenne reopened any healing wounds. He stole them in pieces, nothing traceable. Just enough to raise eyebrows, not alarms. He rerouted 2 power junctions into a temporary loop designed to simulate degradation. Scheduled a diagnostic freeze for 21:30 local time. The override would last 11 minutes. Enough. At 20:10, he handed in his shift report to the front office. Standard. Boring. Non-urgent. It gave him room to move without being missed. He crossed the upper compound perimeter and slid into the maintenance tunnels. He was already underground by the time the first alert sounded. At 21:32, the lights went dead on level B3. At 21:33, the security panel at Isolation Ward 4A suffered a momentary overload. The lock disengaged, and no one noticed. At 21:34, Lyenne Vera stepped into the corridor in stolen boots and a technician's backup coat that Kael had left folded on the bench. Her hair was tied back. Her breath was steady. And her eyes, always silent, were now sharp enough to cut through concrete. Kael met her at the junction just past the old freight door. "Here," he said, handing her a makeshift satchel. "Water, heat wrap, nutrient gel." She took it. Slung it over her shoulder. Glanced down at the hallway behind them. "No turning back," she said. "There never was," he replied. They moved quickly through the access shaft that connected the isolation wing to the service stairwell, normally sealed, but Kael had disabled the pressure lock an hour earlier. The snow outside had grown heavier, swirling under the loading dock like ash in a dying fire. "We won't go up," Kael said. "Too many sensors. We head east, through the cold storage tunnel." Lyenne nodded. They moved like shadows, hugging walls, breathing shallow. Twice Kael stopped, listening for patrols. Once they heard a voice on the comms, one of the guards swearing about system failures. Perfect. They reached the lower hatch and slipped inside the tunnel just as the compound's backup lights surged back online. Kael closed the hatch behind them. Sealed it. Turned to Lyenne. "You all right?" She adjusted the pack on her shoulder. Her breath formed clouds in the frozen air. "I've been worse." Kael smiled faintly. "I'll take that as progress." They moved deeper into the tunnel, steps echoing against the frozen metal. No one chased them. Not yet. But Kael knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. He glanced at Lyenne, at the quiet fire in her eyes. She wasn't broken. She never had been. She had simply been silenced. And now? Now she had a voice again. The service tunnel groaned like a dying lung as Kael forced the hatch shut behind them. The seal hissed. Dust spiraled in the air like ashes disturbed from the bones of a forgotten world. They were in now. Beneath it all. Past the sensors. Past the rules. And past the point of return. Lyenne pressed her back against the cold metal wall, eyes closed. Not from fear but from calculation. Kael could see it in the tightness of her jaw, the way her fingers wrapped around the satchel like it was the last stable thing in her orbit. "This path," she said, breath visible in the freezing dark. "How long?" 3 kilometers to the first junction, Kael replied. "Then we cut under the decommissioned transport loop. That'll get us clear of the patrol grid." "And after that?" Kael didn't answer immediately. He pulled a light from his belt, clipped it to his collar. The beam cut forward into the tunnel, long, narrow, and lined with frost-thick grates that hadn't been walked in years. "After that, we find the child." Lyenne's eyes flicked toward him. "He didn't say your child. He said the child. Not to diminish but to anchor. To remind them both why they were here. Why they were breaking every line they'd spent their lives obeying." She nodded once. They moved. Their footsteps echoed like distant whispers. Metallic. Hollow. Above them, the Les Prime's night cycle churned on, oblivious. Security teams were no doubt scrambling to reinitialize the diagnostics. Someone would notice the missing patient file. Someone would run the audit. And someone would realize that a condemned woman and a burnt-out technician had vanished beneath the floorboards. But it wouldn't matter. By the time they connected the dots, Kael and Lyenne would be somewhere they couldn't follow. He kept their pace slow. Measured. The tunnel narrowed in parts, forcing them to move sideways, ducked beneath collapsed braces and dead conduit lines. Lyenne didn't complain once. Even when the metal bit into her legs. Even when her breath hitched with fatigue. Kael glanced back at her as they cleared the first curve. "You doing okay?" She exhaled through gritted teeth. "I was raised in a sterile chamber. Groomed for presentation. I've never walked this far without collapsing before." Kael slowed. "We can rest if..." "No," she straightened. "Just let me say it aloud. I'm not used to weakness being allowed." He didn't respond. Not with words. He reached back and offered her his hand. She took it. At the second kilometer, they found the debris. Collapsed scaffolding blocked half the passage, old steel beams warped from freeze cycles, jagged and unstable. Kael approached cautiously, scanning for alternate paths. "None. We'll have to climb through," he said. Lyenne nodded. "Go first." "I'll follow." Kael pulled himself up onto the lower beam, boots scraping against rust and ice. He wedged his shoulder through a narrow gap and disappeared into the wreckage. Lyenne followed, slower, more carefully. Midway through, the structure shifted. A support beam cracked above them. Ice fell in sheets. Kael spun and grabbed her arm just as the passage behind them collapsed, sealing off the way back in a thunder of ancient steel. Dust and frost poured around them. The silence afterward was suffocating. Lyenne coughed once, then looked up at him. "So that's it, then?" Kael grinned despite himself. "Forward only." They moved again. The third kilometer was quieter. They stopped once in an old maintenance alcove to share a nutrient pack and drink half a vial of water. Lyenne sat with her back against the wall, breathing deeply, fingers pressed to her temples. Kael sat beside her, arms resting on his knees. "You've done this before," she said again, softer this time. "Not exactly like this. But you've run." He nodded. "From silence. From complicity. From the idea that surviving means forgetting." Lyenne turned to him. "You're not just running anymore?" Kael met her gaze. "No. I'm chasing now." "Chasing what?" He didn't answer immediately. "Then, redemption." They sat in silence for a long time. And then they rose again. The final stretch of tunnel ended at a rust-stained security door, barely functioning. Kael pried it open with his tools, metal groaning under pressure. The space beyond was larger, a cold storage bay long since emptied, its walls lined with broken cryo chambers and nutrient crates covered in dust. And one exit. A ladder, half buried under debris, leading upward toward the transit loop, a path that would eventually lead to Sector 9's outer network. Where the last clue to Niva's location pointed. Kael turned to her. This is where it gets harder. Lyenne stepped forward. No hesitation. She's up there. Kael nodded. Somewhere. And if they find us, then we don't let them take her again. Lyenne's fingers curled into fists. They tried to erase her. Erase me. But you're still here? I'm not sure I was meant to survive. Kael looked at her, quiet. No one is, he said. We survived anyway. They climbed the ladder in silence. Kael went first, checking each rung for stability. Halfway up, he reached down once to steady Lyenne when she slipped. She grunted, pulled herself back, and kept going. At the top, a narrow access hatch waited. Kael listened. Nothing. He pushed it open. The world beyond was different, still cold, still abandoned, but wider. There were no walls. Just distance. A ruined tram platform stretched out before them, covered in ice and graffiti, overlooked by broken scaffolding and rusted rail conduits. No cameras. No eyes. No order. And for the first time since they entered the dark, they stood under open sky. It wasn't daylight, not really. The Thaless sky was always gray, always restless, like the planet couldn't remember what stars were supposed to look like. But it was wide. And it didn't belong to anyone. Lyenne stepped out beside him, breathing shallow. She didn't say a word. Kael pulled a compact transmitter from his satchel and checked its range. We're past the traceable grid, he said. I can signal a low-band contact to smuggle us into 9. Quietly. She looked at him. Then we find her? Kael nodded. They turned toward the far end of the platform. No alarms. No guards. Just wind. But Kael knew this was the eye of the storm. Everything after this would get louder, harder. Because they weren't fugitives anymore. They were a threat. Not because they carried weapons, but because they carried the truth. And the system had always feared that more than anything else. The first hour above ground was silence and breath. Not the kind of silence Kael Thorne was used to, the artificial kind made by static filters and hollow walls. This silence was organic. Alive. It pressed against them from all sides, thick with frozen air and buried sound. The snow wasn't falling. It was suspended, caught in gusts that never settled, just spiraled in slow, sideways patterns, like the planet hadn't quite made up its mind whether to freeze them or let them breathe. Lyenne walked beside him, face half hidden beneath a scarf Kael had given her cut from the lining of his own jacket. Her eyes were raw but focused. No longer the look of a prisoner or even a fugitive. She had shifted. Became something else. A mother in motion. A fuse with legs. They didn't speak as they moved across the abandoned platform, ducked beneath a broken tram conduit, and slipped into the maintenance trench Kael had scouted a week earlier when he still thought he'd only be here for camera diagnostics. He'd been tracing a different problem then. Now he was chasing a life. And every echo from the tunnel behind them made his hand twitch toward the satchel on his hip, not for a weapon, but for the transmitter slate he could smash in an instant if they were found. They weren't fugitives. They were evidence. The first checkpoint came just before dawn. Not official, just 2 guards huddled near a temporary warming unit beside a rusted-out crawler truck. One smoked. The other scanned the perimeter with lazy eyes and a heat reader that hadn't been recalibrated in months. Kael pulled Lyenne down into a drainage duct and waited. She was shaking slightly, not from fear or cold but because her muscles were starting to remember what freedom required. Endurance. Restraint. Stillness. He whispered, 10 seconds. Then they rode 8. She nodded, adjusted the scarf tighter around her face. On the count, they moved, darting across the open slab between scanner arcs, slipping behind the collapsed loading wall and into the service stairwell beyond. No alarms. No pursuit. But Lyenne leaned against the stair rail, breath ragged. They don't see me, she said between gasps. Not really. I don't look like anything they are trained to recognize. You're not a threat in their database, Kael said. That's the only kind of safe. Her lips twisted. But you're marked now? Kael shrugged. Someone's got to be. They climbed the rest of the way in silence. Sector 9 was a different planet. Not officially on paper, it was just another municipal ring under the Les Prime's core governance. But down here, beneath the broken sky bridges and collapsed mag rail lines, it was something else entirely. No cameras. No checkpoints. Just old tech and older ghosts. Graffiti lined the walls in overlapping layers. Symbols from half a dozen dialects. Gang tags. Protest slogans. Warnings. No gods. No scans. No sale. Kael recognized some of the older Marx resistance cells that had burned out years ago, wiped from public records but still remembered in the bones of places like this. This way, he said, turning down a maintenance stairwell. Lyenne followed. No hesitation. They crossed 2 more junctions, moving deeper beneath the city shell, until the air thinned and the frost began to bite again. Here, the power grid didn't reach. The heat units had been scavenged or stolen long ago. Kael found a maintenance nook behind a fallen vent panel and ducked inside. This is where we rest, he said. 1 hour. Lyenne slid down against the wall, cradling the satchel between her knees. Her fingers were pale. Cracked. She'd bled from somewhere on the climb, but hadn't mentioned it. Kael didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, he activated a microheater and set a water capsule to warm. Lyenne stared at him. You planned all of this. Enough to improvise the rest. You risked everything for a child that's not yours. Kael looked at her, the faint heater light catching in his eyes. She's yours. That's enough. Lyenne blinked. Then looked away. She has my eyes, she said. But she speaks like him. Kael said nothing. Just passed her the warm water pack. I wasn't supposed to be a mother, she added quietly. I was bred. Tailored. Catalogued. I was a template, not a person. But she happened anyway. Good, Kael said. She was a glitch. Some glitches save systems. Lyenne exhaled slowly, eyes shimmering in the low light. They said I imagined her? They needed you to believe that. I almost did. But you didn't. No, she whispered. Because I heard her cry when they took her? Kael nodded. Then we find her, he said. And we don't stop until we do. They moved again before the hour was up. Kael's contact, an old smuggler named Aaron who owed him more than one favor, had agreed to meet at the edge of the old filtration dome, just past the northern lift tunnel. If he showed. If he wasn't dead. If he hadn't already sold Kael's name for a better deal. They reached the outer ring of the filtration sector just after the light dimmed into its artificial dusk cycle. Lyenne walked slower now, but her posture had changed. She no longer looked like she was surviving. She looked like she was hunting. I can feel her, she said. Kael didn't dismiss it. He simply nodded. Aaron was waiting hood up, gear bag at his feet, half-lit vape stick in his mouth. He looked up when Kael approached. I thought you were a ghost. Kael shrugged. Not yet. Aaron glanced at Lyenne, then at the narrow tunnel behind them. His face shifted, less curiosity, more calculation. I heard chatter, he said. Biogene scan matches. They are sweeping the grid for a hybrid signature. Not tagged, but resonant. That her. Kael's silence was answer enough. Aaron cursed under his breath. That girl's not just wanted. She's valuable. You know what you're carrying. Kael stepped forward, close enough that his voice came low and steady. I'm carrying a child. You got a problem with that? Aaron stared at him. Then shook his head. No problem. Just logistics. He tossed a small data puck across the space. Kael caught it. Secure entry node to the grid spine. Tunnel bypass to subsector 14. Gets you beneath the ward zone. Appreciate it, Kael said. You'll owe me. I already do. Aaron grinned. Stay warm, Thorn. He vanished into the dark. Kael turned to Lyenne, who hadn't spoken the entire time. She met his eyes. He knew, she said. Yes. And he still helped. Kael nodded. Because not everyone forgets what it's like to have nothing. Lyenne's voice was quiet. We're not nothing. Kael smiled faintly. No. We're something now. They moved again, deeper into the icebound veins of the city. Toward Niva. Toward whatever came next. They didn't know if they'd win. They just knew they weren't going to lose quietly. The final shaft was barely wide enough for a human body. Kael had to crawl, shoulders scraping metal, elbows pushing forward inch by inch. Lyenne followed close behind, slower, her breath measured but tight. Neither spoke. The silence was no longer caution, it was ritual. The act of holding breath before something sacred. The filtration dome had collapsed years ago, leaving only partial infrastructure beneath the surface of Sector 9. But Kael had memorized the access diagrams, studied the contractor overlays from before the place went off books. There had been a support nursery constructed deep within the core originally meant for trauma recovery and critical care for bioengineered miners. But that was a lie. It had become something else. They emerged from the vent into a storage alcove lined with crates, nutrient gel packs, discarded bedding, and makeshift dividers. The air was warmer here, stale with recycled breath and antiseptic. Kael stood first, reached down, and helped Lyenne up. She winced, but said nothing. Her knees were bruised, and her fingers bled faintly from the crawl, but her eyes were fixed ahead. Sharp. Hunter clear. They listened. Faint voices drifted from down the corridor. Two of them. Casual. Not alert. Unarmed, Kael guessed. Or overconfident. He turned to Lyenne. I'll create a distraction at the rear gate. When they move, you go in through the lower chamber. That's where they'll keep her if she's here. Lyenne's face was still. She's here. Kael didn't argue. He moved fast, looping around through the back corridor and overloading a steam valve he'd spotted earlier. The hiss was instant, followed by a shriek from the old piping and a burst of pressure that rattled the walls. The voices down the corridor cursed and moved off. He signaled with 2 taps on the wall. Lyenne slipped into the chamber. Inside was quiet. Dim red lights buzzed along the walls. Rows of low sleeping pods lined the space like coffins repurposed for breath. Each pod bore a crude tag, some scratched in, others painted hastily. No birth records. No kin identifiers. Just numbers. And letters. She walked the line, eyes scanning each tag. Until she saw it. Envelope, D3. No birth year. No bloodline marker. Just that. Her breath caught in her throat. Kael arrived just behind her as she knelt down. The child lay curled on a thin mattress, red hair tangled over pale blue skin, legs pulled up beneath her. She was still asleep. Still breathing. Is that Kael began? Lyenne didn't answer. She reached out. Softly. Slowly. Her fingers brushed the girl's arm. Niva's eyes fluttered open. There was no scream. No confusion. She whispered one word. Mama. Lyenne collapsed, gathering the girl into her arms like she'd been holding that motion in her bones for years. She pressed her face to Niva's hair, breathing in deeply, as if every inhale stitched her heart back together. I'm here, she whispered. I'm here. I never stopped looking. Kael didn't move. Didn't breathe. Until a voice rang out behind him. Step away from the child. 2 figures stood in the chamber entrance. Black coats. No insignia. Private enforcers. The kind that didn't need jurisdiction. Just payment. You're trespassing, the taller one said. The child is property now. Contractually reassigned. Return her and surrender. Kael stepped in front of them. She's blood-marked, he said. That makes this illegal detainment. The shorter guard raised his weapon. You've already broken 5 codes. Don't make it worse. Behind him, Lyenne stood. Knife in her arms. She didn't flinch. Touch her, she said, voice like a blade, and I'll end you with my bare hands. The guard laughed. You were strapped to a bench 3 days ago. What are you going to do, cry us to death? Kael didn't give him time to finish. He triggered the flash charge he'd pocketed from the storage room earlier. The room went white. Gunfire cracked. Kael grabbed Lyenne's hand, pulled her and Niva toward the utility exit. They ran. Alarms blared behind them, but the corridor ahead was clear. Niva clung to her mother, silent, her small fingers curled in the folds of Lyenne's coat like she never intended to let go again. They reached the emergency shaft. Kael slammed the lock closed behind them. Only then did they breathe. She remembered me, Lyenne whispered, clutching Niva tightly. She didn't cry. She knew. Kael nodded. She never forgot. They moved again. Faster now. Kael guided them through the old maintenance tunnel leading to the extraction point he'd pre-arranged with Aaron's contact. A freighter small, fast, no markings was already waiting in low orbit, riding the beacon signal Kael had activated earlier. 37 minutes. That's how long they had before the net closed. They reached the launch corridor just as the lights began to sweep the upper levels. Patrols. Drones. Automated scans. Kael sealed the entrance behind them with a plasma lock. 3 of them now. 3 heartbeats. 1 direction. Lyenne didn't ask where they were going. She just held her daughter and kept moving. Kael's legs burned. His lungs ached. His shoulder was bruised from the fall earlier, but he didn't stop. When they finally reached the boarding zone, the freighter was already descending. Dust and ice kicked up in a storm around them as the vessel hovered low. The ramp extended with a shriek. A voice shouted from inside. Kael Thorne. He nodded, pushing Lyenne and Niva toward the ship. Go. Lyenne hesitated. You're coming too, she said. I have to cover you? No, she said, grabbing his wrist. No more silence. Kael looked at the tree line behind them. Flashlights were cutting through the dark. Voices shouting. He turned back. And ran. They boarded together. The ramp sealed behind them with a metallic slam. The freighter banked upward, away from the Theless Prime, engines roaring as it pierced the outer cloud line. Inside, Kael collapsed against the wall. Bleeding. Shaking. Alive. Lyenne dropped beside him, still holding Niva, her face streaked with dirt and frost, but her eyes were clear. Not afraid. Just full. Niva climbed onto Kael's lap without a word. She didn't ask where they were going. She just leaned against him. And Lyenne whispered, You're not just the one who believed me. You're the one who chose us. Kael met her eyes. Tired. But smiling. And I'll keep choosing you. Every time. Outside the viewport, stars spilled open like broken silver. They weren't free. Not yet. But they were together. And for the first time since this began, that was enough. The freighter tore through the upper atmosphere like a blade through breath. Outside the viewport, the last hints of the Theless Prime shrank into swirling cloud cover. Dust. Ice. A planet that had buried too many stories under silence and protocol. Now, for the first time, one had escaped. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. Kael sat against the side bulkhead, breathing hard through his teeth. Blood matted his sleeve, but the burn in his shoulder was already numb. Across from him, Lyenne held Niva like the girl was made of glass and memory both. The child slept, one hand still curled into the front of Kael's jacket like a tether. Neither parent moved. Not yet. They all needed to believe for one moment that the hardest part was behind them. But the comms chimed. Just once. Sharp. Cold. The pilot's voice followed. Calm. Professional. Reroute alert. Velran Planetary Division has triggered an override signal. Our trajectory's been flagged. Intercept vessel inbound. 3 minutes. Kael's heart clenched. Lyenne looked up. How? Kael checked his slate. Static. Wiped. Credentials didn't hold, he muttered. Someone noticed the file deletion. Maybe a checkpoint report flagged it retroactively. Or maybe, Lyenne said softly, they were watching all along. He didn't disagree. She held Niva tighter. What now? Kael stood, swaying once before steadying. We jump. Lyenne blinked. What? He pointed toward the back of the freighter. There's a maintenance chute. It was built for low-atmo evasive drop loads. We trigger the override, slow vent the pressure, and eject at low altitude before they get a lock. With a child. She's light. And we'll guide descent with surface skids. Lyenne didn't hesitate. Do it. The freighter rocked once as a distant pulse tube focused to be natural cut across its tail fin. The pilot swore through the comms. Lights turned amber. Kael pulled Niva into his arms, wrapping her in his jacket, double layered with a thermal pack he didn't have time to test. He turned to Lyenne. You jump after me. No arguing. Her jaw clenched. Then nodded. He slammed the emergency release. The hatch blew wide. Wind screamed. The temperature dropped instantly, sharp enough to numb skin through armor. Kael didn't think. He held Niva against his chest. And fell. The world became noise and white and weightlessness. The skid deployed with a burst of compressed air. His body snapped back in a jolt, the descent stabilizing just enough to aim toward the snow-slick landscape below. He hit hard. Rolled. Shielded Niva with his own body, absorbing the worst of it. When he came to, his ears were ringing. But she was breathing. And seconds later, Lyenne crashed down beside them, her landing rougher, her leg twisted awkwardly beneath her, but she was conscious. Alive. Together. Again. They ran. The storm came in fast. Thaless didn't offer grace. It offered whiteout winds, horizontal sleet, and zero visibility past 10 meters. Kael led them toward an old freight corridor he remembered from recon days: collapsed fences, gutted warehouses, broken tram tunnels. Not on any grid. Perfect. By the time they reached the depot's edge, Kael was limping, Lyenne was dragging her left leg, and Niva had gone silent again, but her eyes stayed open, locked on her mother, on Kael, on the storm. She hadn't cried once. Inside the depot, Kael sealed the outer door with a fusion weld and collapsed against the wall. His lungs felt like they'd been grated. His thoughts were static. Lyenne sat beside him. Niva curled between them, wrapped in both coats now, tiny face pressed to Kael's chest. She knew you wouldn't leave, Lyenne said. Kael didn't respond. You could have, she continued. But you didn't. I never planned to, Kael said softly. She looked at him. She said, Mama says you're strong. Kael swallowed. I'm tired. Me too. They didn't speak for a while. Then Lyenne's voice returned, lower. We can't run forever. No, Kael said. But we can disappear. She turned to him, not quite hopeful, not quite broken. There's a place, he continued. North Ridge. Old atmospheric research base. Shut down after a reactor scare. No patrols. No sensors. Still shielded. You've been there. Once. Long ago. You think it'll hold? I think I'd rather freeze trying to reach it than let them take her back. Lyenne looked down at Niva, who was now asleep, her breath slow, steady, trusting. She's all I have. Kael nodded. She's all we have now? The climb was brutal. They left under cover of dusk, bundled in salvaged gear. Kael carried supplies. Lyenne carried Niva. The girl never once asked to be set down. The terrain shifted from fractured steel to cracked ice. The wind was alive, howling with voices that didn't belong to any language but still somehow said turn back. They didn't. Each step forward was earned. Each meter cost blood and silence. When they stopped for a moment behind a collapsed wind tower, Lyenne's voice cracked. I wasn't made for this. Kael turned to her. No one is. I was made to be beautiful, she spat. To be desired. Displayed. Not to survive blizzards. Not to fight patrols. Kael stepped closer. None of that matters now. I was a product, Kael. No, he said. You're a mother who crawled through frozen tunnels, who shielded her child in free fall, who ran through gunfire for the sake of someone else's breath. She blinked. You're the strongest person I've ever met. She didn't cry. But she nodded. And they moved again. At sunrise, they reached the outer ridge. The old research base crouched beneath the snow like a fossil, metal ribs barely showing through the ice. Kael bypassed the lock with a signal pulse and forced the hatch open. The warmth inside wasn't comfort, it was absence of death. But it was enough. They collapsed inside. Sealed the bulkhead. And for the first time in days, they stopped. Kael sat on the floor, legs shaking. Lyenne knelt beside Niva, checking her pulse, her temperature. The girl was exhausted but alert. Her tiny fingers still clung to Kael's jacket like she knew what it meant now. Kael looked at both of them. Then exhaled. They weren't safe. Not truly. But for the first time, they weren't being hunted. They were choosing where to stand. And for now, that was everything. The research station had been dead for years. But not forgotten. Kael stood in the central control chamber, fingers blackened with old grease, jacket torn at the shoulder, cheeks cut from the wind. His breath fogged against the broken display in front of him. Lights flickered on the console, dim and unreliable. The fusion backup cell he'd buried here 5 years ago just in case was still viable. Not enough to power the station, but just enough to send a signal. He connected the relay line manually. No uplink. No broadcast tower. Just a coded burst shot through an old directional beacon tucked into the station's roof, shielded, silent, untraceable if you didn't know the signature. It wouldn't reach the central systems. But it might reach someone else. Someone who didn't need questions to act. Lyenne entered behind him. Her coat was heavy with frost, her arms wrapped protectively around Niva, who clung to her chest, half asleep. The child hadn't spoken in hours, but her eyes remained alert, always tracking Kael, always looking to her mother. Did it work? Lyenne asked. Kael didn't answer immediately. He stared at the blinking cursor on the console screen, waiting. Then, a response. One pulse. Then silence. He smiled, faint but real. They are coming. Lyenne exhaled, her whole body folding just slightly. Not from weakness. From release. But the moment didn't last. Niva sat up suddenly. Someone's clothes. Kael turned sharply. Lyenne looked at her daughter. What do you mean? I feel them, the girl said, voice quiet but certain. They are angry. Kael didn't doubt her. He moved fast. The scanner node he'd rebuilt from old atmospheric gear showed 6 contacts. Moving quickly. No registry. No broadcast tags. Not soldiers. Worse. Scavengers, Kael muttered. They picked up the alert net. They are not here to arrest. They are here to sell. Lyenne's voice was ice. They know what she is. Yes? Then we don't run. Kael met her eyes. No. We don't. He moved to the storage locker and pulled out the only defensive tool the station still had, an old rail bar, warped and half cracked, but heavy. Not a weapon. But something. Lyenne handed Niva to him. Take her down to the lower lab, seal the door. I'll draw them toward the turbine hall. Kael shook his head. No. You'll protect her? We both will. A noise interrupted them. Not outside. Above. The roof groaned. Kael's eyes widened. They are on the tower trying to cut the signal. He turned, pulled Niva to his chest, and ran. Lyenne followed, not looking back. The corridor erupted in noise. Boots. Shouts. Metal crashing against metal. Kael sealed the lab hatch behind them and crouched low, wrapping Niva in the insulated blankets stored near the old diagnostics rig. Stay here, he said, touching her cheek. No matter what you hear, you stay quiet. You stay down. She nodded, wide-eyed but composed. Lyenne turned to him, a length of metal conduit in her hand. I'm not afraid anymore. Kael smiled. That's good. Because we're out of time. The hatch behind them buckled once, then twice. Then blew open. Figures poured in, masked and armored. Not clean, not trained, just fast, aggressive, desperate. The kind of desperation that came from smelling value in the air. Kael struck first, the bar catching the lead raider in the knee, dropping him. Lyenne swung upward, smashing her improvised weapon into another's visor. Blood sprayed. The third fired wild and the bolt scorched the wall beside Kael's head. They didn't fight to win. They fought to slow. To protect what was behind them. And when one raider lunged too far, Kael drove the bar straight into his chest. The man dropped. The others hesitated. Then came the voice. Stop. From behind them. A different voice. Measured. Cold. Amplified through a command visor. Kael turned. 2 VPD officers stood in the broken doorway. Uniforms spotless. Weapons raised. But not aimed at Kael. Aimed at the scavengers. You are in violation of planetary code, the lead officer said. Drop your weapons. The scavengers opened fire. The VPD didn't hesitate. The air turned to smoke and screams. Kael grabbed Lyenne and pulled her back into the shadows. They crouched beside Niva as plasma bolts lit the lab like a strobe. The chaos was overwhelming, but Kael noticed something. The VPD weren't aiming at him. Or Lyenne. Just the scavengers. Too clean. Too intentional. And then. The voice again. Kael Thorne. Lyenne Vera. You are ordered to surrender the child into protective custody. No charges will be filed. Compliance ensures safety. Kael whispered, it's a lie. Lyenne gripped his arm. They don't want justice. They want ownership. Kael nodded. We run. The escape was blind. Through the turbine vent. Across the broken gant rise. Down the collapsed stairwell. Behind them, the VPD gave chase, but only briefly. They weren't equipped for a full pursuit in a dead zone. Kael knew they were buying time, not distance. When they reached the emergency hatch, the snow outside was blinding. But something moved in the clouds above. A ship. Fast. Black. Unmarked. Kael's beacon had worked. The vessel descended rapidly, stirring a vortex of snow as its ramp dropped with a mechanical scream. A voice called out. Thorne. Bring the girl. 15 seconds. Kael didn't wait. He hoisted Niva in his arms. Lyenne clung to his back, limping from the fight. They crossed the last few meters just as shadows emerged behind them from the storm VPD patrols. Too slow, too far. Kael didn't stop. They boarded. The ramp sealed. And the ship vanished into the sky. Inside, the silence returned. This time, warm. Niva curled up on the bench, wrapped in both coats, eyes already fluttering closed. Lyenne slumped beside her, one hand resting on her daughter's back, the other gripping Kael's wrist like a promise. "You stayed," she whispered. "I always would." She looked up. "You chose us." Kael met her gaze. "And I'll keep choosing you. No matter what comes next." Outside, the stars stretched endlessly. They weren't safe. But they were out. And that, for now, was enough. Salmer didn't feel like any world Kael had ever known. The light moved slower here. The wind didn't howl, it whispered, brushing through moss-colored valleys and along silver cliffs like it remembered gentler times. The air carried the scent of something living, something warm, moss blossoms maybe, or root fruit trees that curled around the hillsides like sleeping beasts. 3 months had passed. Enough for the pain in Kael's shoulder to fade. Enough for the bruises on Lyenne's legs to become shadows. Enough for Niva to begin laughing again sometimes, in short bursts, startled by her own joy. They lived in a modular home tucked into a crevice between two sun-warmed ridgelines. It had one reinforced roof, 4 rooms, and silence. The good kind. No patrols. No surveillance. No questions. Kael had chosen the place for its distance 5 kilometers from the nearest settlement, 10 from any transport hub. The kind of place where people minded their own stories. He spent mornings repairing the solar brackets on the roof, afternoons mapping out the old COMM towers in case they ever needed to signal again. Nights, he sat near the edge of the ridge, watching the stars rise not in fear anymore, but in memory. Inside, Lyenne tended to the hydroponic unit and taught Niva how to press seed pods into soil. The girl took to it with wide eyes and small, determined fingers. She never asked about the less. She never said the word run. But sometimes when she was half asleep she'd murmur in her sleep. Names. Codes. Fragments of things no 5-year-old should know. Kael didn't tell Lyenne. Not yet. Because part of him didn't want to believe what it meant. One evening, after the sun dipped behind the cliffs and painted the sky in colors Kael didn't have names for, he stepped inside to find Niva curled on the floor, staring at an old data slate. She wasn't watching anything. She was reading the code. Binary. Raw system logic. Her fingers danced across the interface, adjusting parameters, bypassing permission gates that should have taken days to hack. Kael froze. "Where did you learn that?" he asked gently. Niva looked up. "You showed me." "Before." Kael crouched. "Before what?" "Before we got quiet." She smiled faintly. Then handed him the slate. "I made you something." He opened the file. It was a signal map. A refined echo of the last burst he'd sent from the beacon. Stronger. More efficient. Hidden. His throat tightened. "Niva," he said slowly, "how did you know how to do this?" She tilted her head. "It's easy. It's like remembering a song. I just know where it goes." Lyenne appeared in the doorway. She saw Kael's face. And understood immediately. "She's changing," Kael said. "Or maybe, she always was." Lyenne moved to her daughter, knelt, and wrapped her arms around the small frame. "I never told you," she whispered. Kael waited. When they took her, they didn't just detain her. They tested her. Blood. Tissue. They wanted to know if she'd inherit me. Kael swallowed. "And did she?" Lyenne nodded. "She's not just a child. She's a codiki. A biological bridge. Her genome crosses boundaries that were never meant to merge." "She's proof," Kael said. And that's why they'll never stop, Lyenne finished. Kael looked down at Niva, who had fallen asleep against her mother's chest, breathing soft and even. She's 5, he said. And she rewrote a military signal sequence. She's dilatory, Lyenne said. But more than that, she's untethered. No instruction set. No built-in override. She's not controlled. Kael stood slowly, chest tight. We have to leave again. No, Lyenne said. Kael looked at her. We can't outrun this forever. We're not running, she said. Not this time. He paused. Then what? We teach her. The days that followed weren't marked by alarms or chases or shadows. They were marked by quiet revolutions. Niva learned balance, how to listen to the pulse of the air, how to feel when frequencies shifted. She built things from scrap, wind-powered toy engines, heat traps, directional chimes that sang when someone approached the valley floor. She never asked for permission. She simply understood. One night, as they sat under the rich canopy, Kael turned to Lyenne. You didn't plan to stay with anyone, he said. You told me once. I didn't, she replied. But you did. I stayed because you never tried to fix me. You just stood still. Let me come back on my own. Kael's voice was quiet. I've loved you for a long time. She smiled. I know. He reached out, brushing a loose strand of red hair from her face. You think we'll ever stop being hunted? No, she said. But we'll never be caught again. From inside the house, Niva's voice rang out. Mama. Daddy. I set the table. Kael blinked. Lyenne laughed softly. She asked me yesterday if she could call you that. And I told her, you don't need to share blood to share a future. Kael smiled. She's not what they made, he said. No, Lyenne said. She's what we chose. They stood, hand in hand, and walked back to the house, just a small shelter under alien stars. Not safe. But home. The rain on Salmard didn't fall. It floated. Tiny crystal droplets hovered for seconds in the air before drifting down like memories too heavy to stay aloft. The sun filtered through them in long golden shards, setting the valley aglow with a light that didn't belong to any season. Just now. Kael stood by the hydroponic basin, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in root clay. Niva crouched beside him, tongue out slightly as she focused on spacing the seeds just the way he'd shown her. Her hands were small, but precise. Purposeful. She didn't rush. Not anymore. The wariness that once curled around her eyes like shadow was gone. In its place was something better. Not innocence, but confidence. I think this row's crooked, she said with mock seriousness. Kael grinned. Then you're in charge of fixing it. I'm just muscle now. You're old, she said. He laughed. That too. Behind them, Lyenne leaned against the doorway of the home they had built, watching them with a gaze that was more than just maternal. It was timeless. Grateful. Safe. She held a small cup of brewed root tea, wrapped in both hands like it was sacred. Her belly had begun to swell. Not dramatically, but enough that Kael noticed the way she touched it when she thought no one was looking. Absent-minded. Reverent. Their second child. Born not of miracle. Not of programming. But of choice. That night, as soft pink stirred the house, Kael sat up from the makeshift couch bed near the door. The old console, long dormant except for weather tracking, glowed faintly blue. He approached slowly. Touched the edge. One message. Encrypted. But familiar. He decrypted it in silence, eyes scanning each line like a man skimming through someone else's memories. Then smiled. Lyenne appeared in the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. What is it? Kael turned. Do you remember the pilot who picked us up from Thales? The one who didn't ask why, just flew. Lyenne nodded slowly. Rail. The ghost ship runner. She made it. Set up a safe lane. Off the maps. Refugees. Hybrid families. People like us. Where? Edge of the Cygnus Drift. She's asking if we want in. Lyenne stepped beside him, quiet for a moment. Then, do we? Kael looked back toward the sleeping quarters, where Niva had dozed off beside a half-finished drawing of their new house complete with stars above and flowers on the roof. No, he said. We already have everything we need. Lyenne smiled. Then let them come to us. 2 months later, the first skimmer arrived. Not sleek. Not armed. Just patched metal and slow thrusters, bringing 3 adults, 2 children, and a half-blind service droid whose memory core had been overridden with lullabies. Lyenne helped them unpack. Kael rewired their water lines into the shared supply ring. Niva taught the youngest boy how to balance moss stones on top of each other until they formed impossible towers. By the end of the week, there were 6 families living in the valley. No names. No papers. Just stories. All different. All the same. People who had survived by disappearing. Now choosing to reappear, together. Kael never called himself a leader. He didn't hold meetings. Didn't draw maps. But when someone needed a hand fixing a signal dish, he was there. When someone's child woke up screaming from memories of cages and cells, he didn't ask what caused them, he just stayed until they could sleep again. Niva grew up knowing she was more than what anyone had tried to make her. She was a daughter. A sister. A seed that never should have taken root, and yet did. Not because of luck. But because 2 people had said, "You belong here." You always did. Years passed. The stars above Salmaran never dimmed. One day, Kael found Niva standing on the same ridge where he once watched the stars rise alone. She was older now, taller, sharper, her hair braided the way Lyenne had taught her. In her hands, she held a signal transponder. Not a distress call. Not a beacon. Just a message. Anyone listening, she said quietly, you are not broken. You are not unworthy. If you're running, stop. If you're hiding, come home. We're not afraid of who you are. She paused. Then smiled. Because we've already seen what happens when love gets a second chance. She tapped the panel. The message looped. Behind her, Kael stood in the doorway, watching. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a fugitive. Or a rebel. Or a witness to something impossible. He felt like a father. And that was everything. They ran. They fought. But in the end, they didn't win with bullets or bombs. They won with something far rarer, unshakable love in a world that had no room for the kind that didn't fit. Kael, Lyenne, and Niva were never written into history books. They didn't save the galaxy. But they did something no interstellar government could. They saw life and chose to protect it. And maybe, that's what makes a family. Not blood. Not law. But the choice to stay when everyone else walks away. Headphone, thank you for staying through to the end of this journey. Milky Way, if you've ever felt like you didn't belong anywhere, remember, out there, someone like you exists. And maybe one day, you'll find a home not made by inheritance, but by intention. Speech balloon, what would you do if the alien you met didn't need saving, only someone who wouldn't walk away?